should follow Will Wheaton's law, right? Don't be a dick. If you have to be explained what that means, then you're probably on the wrong side of that fence. Just be respectful and enjoy the comments and commentary that are made by everybody else, which is, of course, the next rule. Please ask questions, comments, clarifications. I love going more in depth about things if you ask. This class will be both a 101 and a 201, by which I mean that it's going to cover the basics, but it's also going to have additional information at a higher level for those who know the basics. One of the great things is that this is being recorded, so you can watch it later if you can't make it during this time, or if you just want to go back and see this material after you've seen some of the later lectures and you want to understand the prior context. And finally, for this particular discussion, I want to make it clear there will be pictures of Muhammad in this presentation, and we need to understand that there's a lot of sensitivity around the subject of Muhammad as a person, Muhammad as a historical figure, and Muhammad as a religious figure. As I said, this is from a secular perspective, so all of the specific epithets like Rasulullah alayhi sallam and these sort of terms will not be used, and Muhammad will be treated in much the way that I would treat any other historical figure of import. All right, so since this went over so well last time, there's a new quiz to see what people remember from our last lesson. So question number 1, which of the following accurately describes the relationship between the Byzantine and Sasanian empires from 580 to 630? I'm going to give people a few minutes to decide what they think the answer is, and if anybody would like to speak up.
Say C.
I'm not an expert, but I'm agreeing with C.
Yeah, C is exactly correct, right? They were fighting several wars. The first war was the war between Bahram Choban and Khosrow II, which eventually put Khosrow II in power. Then the second war was when Maurice, the Byzantine emperor, who installed Khosrow II, was overthrown by a military general by the name of Phocas. That Khosrow II declared war on the Byzantine Empire, and basically both empires exhausted all of their resources in trying to take each other down. All of the other answers, of course, are false. Both empires repressed Manichaeism at different times. They did trade, but the Silk Road, as we understand it, was not in existence at this point. And the Byzantines were notoriously religiously intolerant. So the relationship with the Sasanians did not lead to Byzantine religious tolerance. Okay. Question number 2. Which 3 of the following are elements of Sasanian Persia?
Say E and F are true.
Okay.
Would
B, isn't it?
I'm having a hard time with B. Would the population have increased rapidly? The irrigation would have been
Oh,
there
I
all
think they
along.
did. Yes, they did. They did. Yeah.
But I think
That's the whole point of civilization out there is irrigation.
Yeah.
correct. No, maybe the B or C.
Well, I'm questioning that.
No, I think the irrigation was since the Mesopotamian time. So I'll say C, E, and F, like Mark said.
Wow, this one is stumping people. Okay, the right answer is B, C, and E.
Okay.
So the Parthian nobles and the Hephthalites were definitely a part of the Sasanian Empire, but the problem is that the Sasanians couldn't control them. So the Parthians and the Hephthalites actually ran the empire from time to time. The Parthians repeatedly assassinated kings. The Hephthalites actually installed their own king, Kavad I. So those groups were not effectively subdued. They were part and parcel of the empire. Of course, during the reign of Ardashir I and Shapur I, the first 2 kings of the Sasanians, you had the foundation of many new cities. These large cities were created through the use of large-scale irrigation, which doubled the population of the empire over the time of the Sasanians. These new cities created a new landed class of nobility called the Dehqan, which is why C is true. D is false. We know that they actively repressed Orthodox Christianity and were afraid that that the Orthodox Christians would serve as a fifth column for the Byzantines to take over the empire. So Orthodox Christianity was repressed and heretical versions of Christianity were supported. E is true in that they were the first group of Persians, right? They were the first group from Fars since the Achaemenids, and they considered themselves the inheritors of Achaemenid glory. That's also why Khosrow II spent so much time and energy trying to conquer the Byzantine Empire, even when Heraclius was trying to create a peace treaty around 621. And they did have contact with the Avars in Bulgaria. In fact, during the Third Byzantine-Sasanian War, the one that we spent the most time on in our last lecture, they were able to convince the Avars to join them in a siege of Constantinople. But then the Byzantines paid the Avars off, and the Avars went away. But there was certainly meaningful contact. Okay, that was a tricky one. Let's see. This one may be a little bit more confusing. You have 6 countries that exist. 4 of them are Caucasian countries, 2 of them are Arabian countries on the borders between Sasanian Persia and Byzantines. And what was the relationship between the larger empires and these smaller states? I guess that's the timer.
This is tricky.
Caucasian Albania?
Yeah, Caucasian Albania. It's the modern territory of Azerbaijan.
I don't know.
What? Oh, you mean it has nothing whatsoever to do with what's north of Greece?
No. It has nothing to do with Chypadia, the country near to Italy and Greece. Yeah, it has nothing to do with that country.
Okay, my next question was Iberia.
Iberia is a western part. Iberia is the eastern part of what's now the country of Georgia. So,
Okay.
so areas like Tbilisi, Sirnari, Kartli Kakheti, these areas in eastern Georgia were a country called Iberia. All right, so basically the answer to this is A. The Ghassanids and Colchis tended to align with the Byzantines. The Lakhmids and Caucasian Albania tended to align with the Sasanians, and 4 and 5, the Armenians and the Iberians, kept shifting between them as the wars for their territory kept going backwards and forwards. But what's interesting is that all 6 of these are Christian majority countries, but because almost none of them, Colchis is the one exclusion here, almost none of them are Orthodox Christian, they do not align naturally with the Byzantine Empire. So they are Christians, but they are heretical Christians.
Right, because the Armenia was the first church that was built, right? The first Christian country.
Armenia was the first national church, right? So they founded their church in 301 CE. So that's before Constantine converted the Roman Empire. But their church was what was called the Armenian Apostolic Church, and they were not in alignment with the 7 ecumenical councils. There are 7 ecumenical councils at the beginning of the stages of Christianity, and if you disagreed with any of the verdicts of those 7 councils, you were heretical under the view of the Byzantine Empire, and the Armenians disagreed with the ruling in the 7th council, so that made them heretical. Okay, which of the following represents a proper capitulation of what the Zoroastrians believed?
That looks like C to me.
That's exactly correct. C is the right answer. The good supreme creator Ormuzd is in eternal conflict with the evil Angra Mainyu, and humans are the linchpin in this conflict. By supporting Ormuzd against Angra Mainyu, we can achieve salvation for humanity, right? That's the main view of Zoroastrianism, and this was revealed by the prophet Zoroaster in his book, the Avestas.
Yeah, I keep hitting on that because when you look at ancient history, they didn't. If you look at the Greeks and Romans, they weren't into this good and evil stuff, and it's confusing when you read their material when you read their historians. You
Exactly.
realize, Hannibal and Boudica and Vercingetorix were not being demonized for some reason or other.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So A is a common misperception of Zoroastrian belief. We often see when Muslims will write about Zoroastrians, they'll write about them as fire worshippers. This was a common view of what their belief system was, because they do have fire temples and fire is part of their worship, but they use the fire to represent the light of Ormuzd. The answer B is sort of a view of some of the post-Islamic religions that we're going to see, probably something closer to Alevism or Baha'i, although it would be Muhammad's teaching, not Zoroaster's. And answer D is really the base view of Manichaeism, right? The great prophets Buddha, Zoroaster, and Jesus all taught the same message about the light of truth illuminating the universe. That's the fundamental principle of Manichaeism. All right, and the final question: how were heretical non-Orthodox Christian sects treated?
Badly.
In one word,
I don't know, but D looks really interesting.
yeah,
Yeah,
I think
D-
D is the one, right?
D is the correct answer, right? The Byzantine Empire repressed the various heresies against Orthodox Christianity, but the Sasanians actually accepted many of the heretical Christianities. They didn't really see much of a difference between these Christianities, and actually they preferred them because the heretical Christians could be known to not be loyal to the Byzantine Empire, right? So there were many cases where Christians who were born in the Byzantine Empire were induced to immigrate to the Sasanian Empire, bring their expertise with them in whatever kind of expertise they had, whether it was construction or astronomy or otherwise, and work in the Sasanian Empire. In fact, the Sasanian Empire was the primary engine behind the creation of the Assyrian Church of the East. For example, they concluded the council in Ctesiphon, which was, of course, the capital of the Sassanid Empire, in order to create the Church of the East, because that would be a church that would have no connection with the Byzantine Empire. The other ones, obviously, the Byzantines repressed heretical Christianity, so A is false. B is false. We don't have mass Christian genocides in the Sasanian Empire, and they certainly wouldn't have done it to appease the Byzantines. The Byzantines had a really poor relation with the heretical Christians, so they couldn't use them as spies during war. And so that leaves D, as we've said. All right, so now for what we're going to talk about today. So this was sort of the map that we discussed last time, right? You see the Roman, the Byzantine Empire on the western side. You see the Sassanid Persian Empire on the eastern side. You see their two vassals, the Ghassanids and the Lakhmids. In Arabia, you also see that Persia, by 600 CE, Persia also controls the vassals along the Indian Ocean, right? You see Oman, you see Mahra, you see Himyar. All of these are states along the Indian Ocean, and all of them are Persian vassals by 600 CE. One of the things that's worth noting on this map is actually that if you look and you see where Quraysh is along the Red Sea, right? Quraysh is controlling the area where Mecca is at this point. You can see that it's actually not a state. So ironically, the area that we're going to focus on when it comes to Muhammad is an area that is actually not a state, is not incorporated into that structure, is run on sort of a clan basis at this time. But we're going to go back a little bit and see what the politics of Arabia were that led to the position where Muhammad was able to take advantage of the geopolitical situation.
Richard, so these names are what, tribes? They
Exactly
are
that,
empire?
yeah.
Okay.
Those are tribal names.
Okay.
Khatafan, Hanifa, Hawazin, Ka'ab, all of these are tribes.
Richard,
Mhm.
could you also describe a little bit what the economies of these states in Arabia were at this period?
We're actually going to get into that when we go through the prior
Oh,
Arabian.
great. Thanks.
So yeah. All right. So the first state that we're going to discuss is Thamud. Thamud is a state that is difficult to figure out if it existed from an archaeological perspective, because it's difficult to separate them from the larger Nabatean civilization. And we're going to talk about the Nabatean civilization afterwards. But you can see on the left-hand side these carved palaces into the rock. It's very reminiscent of Nabatean construction techniques. And I'm going to show it later. But if you know Petra, Petra is built the same way, right? You have a rock or a mountain, and they literally burrowed into it and carved out the face from the rock. And this is the city of Hegra. You can see
This is soft rock. I mean,
this is sandstone.
okay.
Yeah. So this is the city of Hegra. You can see Hegra is along. One of the things that you notice immediately when you look at the map of Arabia is that most of it is desert, but the area along the Red Sea is actually green because there's a mountain ridge that runs along the Red Sea. So those areas are actually relatively agriculturally viable. And so Hegra is right at the edge of that agriculturally viable area, and was the civilization where the civilization of Thamud, if it existed, was represented by these entities. Right. The question is whether Thamud was an individualistic entity or just another part of Nabatean civilization. So
Richard, so this is a little bit like Egypt, that everything is around the Nile. So where the cities are is near the coast, and then
yes,
it's all desert. Okay.
exactly. The cities are near the coast because the mountains stop rain from passing into the central part of the Arabian desert. And so the mountains lead to these rivers. The rivers are dammed and irrigated. But these are very small rivers. They're not like the Nile. So these are very small rivers. Many of them are seasonal. Right? They'll exist between spring and autumn, but around the winter they dry up. And so these rivers will be dammed up, and then they use irrigation to make the land viable. So almost all of the Arabian civilizations that exist outside of the coastal regions in the south and in the east will exist on the western coast, on the windward side of these mountains. Now, the particular story of Thamud that is really worth discussing is that Muslims and Arabs before them had a number of prophets that they believed existed in Arabia, not just the Abrahamic prophets. And so one of these prophets, the most prominent among them, is Saleh. The story of Prophet Saleh is that he came out of the people of Thamud, right? He was one of them, and he was professing that they should abandon their polytheistic beliefs and believe in one God. The people demanded that if God was really as powerful as Saleh was contending, then they should be able to produce a camel out of a rock. And so you can see the upper right-hand picture. Of course, Saleh uses God's power to produce a camel out of a rock. Most Muslims today believe that the particular mountain I show you in the lower right-hand side of the picture, very close to Hegra, was where this camel emerged, that black spot being where it erupted. But Saleh gave the people a warning that they should not slaughter this camel. The camel would drink from the well every other day and would give them so much milk that they would have plenty. But the people could not get over themselves, and they slaughtered the camel. And as soon as they did, God destroyed the city in a pelt of lava and smoke. Very similar in a lot of ways to the story of Lot, right? Where in Sodom and Gomorrah, only the righteous Lot and his family are able to escape. In the same way, Saleh and his followers were able to escape Thamud, but the remaining people were destroyed in a divine blaze for not accepting God after seeing this miracle. And this becomes sort of a cautionary tale in Arab society and Islamic society afterward of why you shouldn't turn away from God, especially after he's made his proofs known. All right. So now onto the wider Nabatean civilization, and you can see on the lower right-hand side, this is not the treasury itself, but this is another similar structure that is part of Petra. The Nabateans existed for nearly 800 years, and they didn't stop existing in 106 CE. That was simply when the Romans were able to conquer them and their capital city of Petra. And you can see by this map that there were massive trade roads that connected Arabia that were run by the Nabateans based in Petra. So you can see they go all the way to Yemen, which was at that time controlled by Saba. We're going to talk about them in a bit. And the trade was in a number of different resources. There were spices, of course. There was also incense. You can see that on the westward side that it goes through a number of the cities that Muslims will immediately recognize, like Mecca and Medina. You can also see that it connects at Hegra, which we've just seen, right? And these cities were also linked to Ethiopia. You can see that there are trade routes to Aksum in Abyssinia. So the Nabateans were in control of these large-scale trade routes and were therefore able to supply whoever was controlling Egypt, Phoenicia, Syria, and Mesopotamia with rare goods as I said, in that spice or fragrance category. Now, the Nabateans had their own set of deities, the Arabian pantheon. Among them are a number of gods and goddesses. Probably the three most important goddesses were Allat, Al-Uzza, and Manat. You can see sort of pictorial representations of them in the center. And the Nabateans also constructed what were called Beitels, or houses of God. And these Beitels would be a form of idol of a god. So you can see this is a representation of Al-Uzza in a Nabatean Beitel. On the lower part, you can see Nabatean script, which was the predominant writing that they used at the time. And that was the Nabatean civilization. In terms of their relationship with the Romans, they tried to enter into a trade relationship with them while preserving their independence. Several Roman emperors tried to conquer them, and they were only conquered in 106 CE, and that was only their major cities in what's now Jordan.
Richard, and all this religion, because I never heard about any of this. How did the religion kind of eclipse it? Because the Romans, I mean, did it die because the Romans, or did it survive in some other place? Or
No, the trade definitely survived Roman
the
conquest.
trade, but what about the culture, the religion, their
Yeah, the
language?
the religion survived until Islam. So the religion survived the end of the Nabateans. In fact, Arabian polytheism remains one of the three dominant faiths in the region, the other two being forms of Judaism and heretical forms of Christianity.
Thank you.
So I have a question in the comments asking whether enslaved Africans were trekked along this path. I'm unaware of enslaved Africans being moved along these pathways. We don't really see slavery by transportation until around the 800s, 700s, 800s CE. Most of the time, most of the cases at this point of slavery are you were captured in war and you were brought home by your captor, or you were enslaved either legally or mechanically, and you remained a slave where you were. The idea of buying a slave in location X and transporting them to location Y to sell them to another person, this was a development of the 8th century, mostly. All right, so that's the Nabateans, and the next group we're going to discuss are the Sabians, and you can see this is from the game Rome Total War. You can see the camels of the Sabians. The Sabians controlled the northern area of what is now Yemen. You can see them there. You can see just, I have them in sort of that black circle on the left-hand side. You can also see just to the southeast of them, it says Himyarites. That was the way that the Romans called the people of Himyar, that we're going to talk about in a second. And the Sabians really profited off of the frankincense market. And they shipped frankincense through the Red Sea all the way to Egypt, and then from there it could make its way to the rest of the Roman Empire. Now you can see the direction of the frankincense trade moving through those red dashed lines on the map. I have a question if the Arabian pantheism was similar to European pantheism. It was, in the sense that there were many gods, and each of those gods has a distinct function. And the names of the gods are somewhat derivative of the function that they perform. But beyond that, I don't really see. They're certainly less capricious than the Greek pantheon in terms of how they interact with people, but they are more aloof in terms of their behavior, if that answers it. So on the right-hand side, you can see a frankincense tree. They grow in the wild in the western part of Oman. It's a region called Dhofar. And the Sabians cultivated it, and they became incredibly wealthy from it. You can also see the Great Dam of Ma'arib. This was one of the great wonders. Somebody notes in the comment section the Queen of Sheba. Sheba was a rendering of Saba. So the Queen of Sheba was actually the queen of this country that Solomon spoke to. So,
Richard,
yeah.
I'm really above that circle along the Arabian Gulf Coast. I see wine and grain, and I'm really kind of surprised that both of those require a fair amount of water.
Absolutely. As I was explaining, you have the Great Dam of Ma'arib. This was built in the 8th century BC to collect the seasonal rainwater coming off the windward side of the mountains, and that rainwater would be sent to irrigate all of these fields that were growing wine and grain. So if you actually go to Yemen today, or well, I mean, like aside from the civil war, but like if you go there in peacetime, or to the western part of Saudi Arabia, you'd actually be surprised. It is semi-arid, but a lot of stuff grows there because of all the water that has been collected through these irrigation channels. Yemen, when it's not in wartime, is actually able to sustain the majority of its population on its own food. It's a surprising thing for many people outside of Arabia to realize that Arabians actually can grow things.
So you were saying the windward side, so the wind is coming from the west?
The wind is coming, exactly. The wind is coming off the Red Sea from Africa.
But they have to transport that water across what seems to be mountains.
No, the water hits the mountains and then falls into seasonal streams. Those seasonal streams are then built. Then there's a dam built on those seasonal streams to create a reservoir. The reservoirs are then linked to irrigation systems. The irrigation was incredibly complex, and so that's why Ma'arib is considered one of the Arab wonders, because they were able to do this at a very early stage. And it's as you can see there, it's a dam that survives to this day.
So they need a lot of organization, and they need a lot of planning and studying and people working together, right, to do this.
That's exactly right. That's why these kingdoms were forming, right? We've seen through various lessons that the ingredients for civilization are not that you have abundant resources, but actually that you have that you lack resources, but you can acquire resources if people work together, right? Because if you have abundant resources, there's no drive to push people to sublimate their own desires and come together to form civilization.
That makes sense.
I have a question in the comments. What was frankincense used for? It was a fragrance. People, I'm trying to find the right way to say this. People don't smell that great all the, yeah, exactly. People don't smell that great all the time, and so people want it to smell better. And
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was interested in why frankincense was so desired, and I'm looking on WebMD, and not only is not only is for aromatherapy, but to treat arthritis and pain and all kinds of disorders.
I don't know to what extent they knew about that at this time, but I can imagine that there were also medical uses to frankincense that were being exploited. All right, so that's the Sabians. Now, if we remember also, when Muhammad says who the people of the book, when the Quran says who the people of the book are, he lists Jews, Christians, and Sabians. He may well have been referring to the religion of this civilization. It's unclear if he was. The Arabic name of Sabians would match this civilization. All right, so that's the Sabians. And now we're going to meet Himyar. So Himyar starts in Hadramaut, which is the southern part of Yemen, and it expands outward. You can see Himyar at its greatest extent when it fell. It was at its greatest extent actually when it fell under the king Dhu Nawas, who was the last king of Himyar, and he ruled from his capital of Dhafar. You can see Dhafar there on the map. Sorry, Dhafar there, sort of nestled in the hills. And Dhu Nawas was actually a Jewish king. So one of the things that we have to realize is that Judaism in the early centuries CE was a proselytizing religion. And so a number of Jews went into Arabia to convert Arabians to the Jewish faith. And so a number of them lived in Yemen and converted a number of Arabian tribes to Judaism. One of these tribes was the one that led to Dhu Nawas's mother being Jewish. And so he converted to Judaism. Now, there's a debate as to whether he converted because he believed in the religion from a pious perspective or because he believed that it would give him a unique trading advantage. Because
Richard, sorry, why did they go to Arabia? I mean, why Arabia specifically? Why? I mean, did they go other places too and they were not successful? Or?
You have to remember what the Roman Empire's position on Jews was, which was not very favorable. So
the only place that they can get there is...
Well, they could go to the Sasanian Persian Empire, and a number of them did. There were a lot of Jews in Persia as well. But they went anywhere where they felt like they could have religious freedom and toleration. And while they couldn't proselytize in Persia, they could proselytize in the Arab world, right? Because as you saw from the map, the majority of the Arab world was ruled by tribes. It was a quasi-anarchy in terms of, a kind of government that could prevent religious proselytization. And so this is where we see Jewish proselytization. All right. So Dhu Nawas, as I said, converted to Judaism, and many people believe he did that for the political event.
I'm sorry, could you repeat his name?
Dhu Nawas.
Oh, I see it. Thank you.
Yeah, the DH is a the sound. So, so it's, if you don't believe the religious reason, the political reason is that as a Jewish king, right, he could more effectively lobby for support from the Persians, right, than if he were a Christian king, right? Because then if he were a Christian king, he might be in league with the Byzantines. In fact, Dhu Nawas was extremely anti-Christian and led a number of attacks against Christians. The most famous one was in the city of Najran, which is the northern part of his empire. It's part of Saudi Arabia today. And in Najran, you had a forcible conversion of Christians to Judaism. The Christians who resisted were executed. And you can actually see, this is from the Menologion of Basil II. This is an Eastern Orthodox book, and it describes the execution of Aretas, as he was known in his Roman name. His Arab name was Al-Harith, and Al-Harith was a Christian from Al-Harith ibn Kalib was a Christian who lived in Najran, and he refused to give up his faith, and of course for that he was considered a saint. Now, the fact that the Nawas was executing Christians did not escape the notice of Aksum, right? The Abyssinia, the Ethiopian Empire, because as you can see, Ethiopia is very close to where Yemen is. It's right across the Red Sea. And so you have an invasion in 525 led by Aksum to conquer Himyar. And so they come over, and the king of Aksum installs a military general named Abreha as a new king of Himyar. So you have King Abreha of the Aksumite Himyar, and he rules more or less for the next 50 years, 40 to 50 years. There are some breaks, right? The Yemeni do try to fight for their own independence, but basically they're scuttled because King Caleb I of Aksum, who you can see from those coins that he minted, kept sending Ethiopians to further secure Himyar under Christian rule. Now, for his duty to protect, for his actions in protecting Christians, he was sainted by the church as well, and his Christian sainted name in the Roman world is Saint Elaspin. So King Caleb and King Abreha work together, right? Because King Abreha is his installed king of Himyar. Now, the Yemenites reached out to the Persians to expel the Ethiopians and reclaim Himyar for the Arabian people, and in return they would become a vassal state. And so that's exactly what Khosrow I did. You can see this Persian fresco on the right-hand side showing Khosrow going into Yemen and liberating it, quote unquote, from the Christians. The success really came in the year 578, when you can see the Persians with the bow and arrow. They shot Masruq ibn Abreha, so Abreha's son Masruq, with an arrow, and therefore left Aksumite Himyar without a king. Now, the reason we have this idea of the year of the elephant is that this was the year during which Aksum had the greatest amount of control over Himyar before they were expelled in 578. They marched elephants all the way to Mecca, and the first elephant in the line was supposedly named Mahmud, and Mahmud refused to attack the black stone of the Kaaba, which was of course considered a miracle. And from the Muslim perspective, this also presaged the birth of Muhammad, who was himself born in the year 570, in this year of the elephant. So the idea is that something magical was changing in the world, that the Ethiopians couldn't destroy the black stone, and Muhammad was born to give the true meaning of the black stone.
When you said Muslim, what do you mean before Muhammad? I mean,
No. I'm talking about Muslims today when they reflect back on this history.
Okay, thank you.
No. At this time there were no Muslims. The Yemenites were either Jewish, Christian, or polytheistic in the same way that the Nabateans were.
Okay.
Excuse me, Richard. I
Yeah.
try to catch up. Okay, Himyar is Ethiopian.
No, Himyar is the Yemeni kingdom, right?
Okay, so
But when the Ethiopians take it over, they call the new kingdom that they established in Yemen also Himyar, which is confusing because it's a different country, it's a different government, but it's on the same piece of land. So I'm calling it Aksumite Himyar, right? The Himyar built by the Aksumites.
So Aksumite Himyar is African.
Yes.
Okay, so right now we are talking about Year of Elephant is African Himyar, which is Ethiopian, try to invade the Arabian world.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Okay.
They have already invaded Arabia. They control Yemen. They're trying to invade what's now Saudi Arabia.
Oh, so where is the elephant coming from? From Ethiopia?
The elephants are coming from Africa. They're being shipped on boats from Africa to Yemen. Then from Yemen, they're being marched overland to Mecca.
And why they failed? Because
We know the for whatever reason the elephants gave out before they got to Mecca, right? We can ascribe spiritual significance to it, or we can just say it was, you know,
divine.
the heat of the day and the elephants have been marching a lot and they couldn't handle it, or whatever other reason.
Not enough food, not enough water.
Right, exactly.
So
Richard,
how
Richard, this is Nurul. Is it okay if I add
When we-
a couple of
about
points?
elephant? How many elephant we are talking about?
Yeah, sure, Nora.
Yeah, sorry, Jason, just give me 2 minutes. So if I can just narrate why this happened in terms of Islamic perspective. I mean, you can take it or reject it. That's up
Yeah,
to you.
please. Yeah, I'm
So-
pretty.
Yeah. So what exactly happened? As you know, Abraham had two sons. Abraham had Isaac and Ishmael.
Yeah.
And Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is from the lineage of Ishmael. And he was, Abraham, peace be upon him, left Ishmael and his mother, which is Hagar, in that valley of Bakka, which is now known as Mecca. And in that valley, the Kaaba was built, where the Zamzam water was, revealed to Ishmael to quench the thirst, the story that you actually heard in the first session, which Richard gave us. So that place was sacred. So that place, that Kaaba was protected by God, Allah. And therefore, when the Abraha came to attack, the army of Abraha came to attack, Allah protected the Kaaba by sending some birds which had heated stones and burning stones on them, and then therefore they were defeated by the birds. So that's actually mentioned in the Holy Quran. So that's just a context for you to understand. You can either take it or reject it. That's up to you.
Thank you, Nora. Jason, does that answer everything?
Oh yeah. Because I heard of this story, but just to make sure it's clear, because I remember it's Ethiopian, So.
All right. So you can actually see from the time that the Aksumites were controlling Himyar, right? Because they were Christian, they built a number of churches, and so you have the Akalis Church of Sana'a. This was a picture from the 1940s. I don't know if it still survives to this day. But you can see the modern buildings of Sana'a, of the Sana'a Old City that are next to it. Sana'a has a very distinctive architecture. And the Al-Khalis is the second area of the, Al-Khalis is sort of a historic church that was built there in the middle
Richard,
of, yeah.
What is the church? I mean, I see a circle and
Yeah, the circle is all that remains of the church, or it was when this picture was taken.
so it was a circular church.
Well, no, you can imagine that there was a cupola over it. And,
Okay.
yeah, and you can see the people who are walking next to it, so you have an idea about how large.
Right, the size. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, so that's the year of the elephant. All right, so now we move. All right, so now we're starting to move into the Arabia of Muhammad's time, right? So we have this sort of situation where Himyar has been through a massive war, right? Yemen is now a Persian vassal state under Khosrow I of the Persians. And you have a number of trade cities that have been set up by the Nabateans all along the coast. You can see a number of the ones that, here that are relevant to Muhammad's story along the Red Sea coast. We have a huge multiplicity of religions going on. One of the things that I really like is this stela in the center. You can see on the left-hand side, that is the goddess Nemesis from the Greek pantheon. Nemesis is the goddess of retribution and destruction. And in the middle, you have Allat, right? Which is a god from the Arab pantheon. So you can see people were just mixing and throwing together different religions all the time. You have the black stone, as Nurul mentioned. This was seen as the site that Abraham's son Ishmael had sanctified during his foray in Saudi Arabia. And a number of different religions put their idols in the Kaaba. And according to the Muslim stories, because from about this point forward, we really don't have much in the way of foreign scholarship outside of the Islamic sources to tell us what's going to go on. We're going to eventually, at the end, address what scholars today think about it. But in order to address the scholars, we need to know what the original story was, because much of what they say is in critique of the original story. So you can see that you have this Kaaba, and the black that you see here in the picture is not actually the black stone itself, it's a curtain. But beneath that curtain is a shrine, and inside the shrine is the black stone. So at this point in time, prior to Muhammad, there were 360 different idols, including the Virgin Mary, inside this shrine. And that made Mecca a very—
Sorry, say it again. What the words? How much? How many?
360. That's the Muslim. This is like, from this point on, I'm telling you in a very secular way what the Muslim story is, because eventually we're going to have to unpack it from a historical or perspective, but we have to know what the Islamic sources say in order to create a coherent narrative when we critique the Islamic narrative, which is what the modern scholars do. So, but you can see here that black square. The square itself is not the stone. The square is actually fabric. Below the fabric is a shrine. Inside the shrine is the black stone. So the black stone is not the size of that whole piece. And you can see like all those little things that look like beads are actually worshippers.
Richard, the black stone is on the right side of the Kaaba. If you see that picture, there is a golden at the bottom. That's actually the Hajar Aswad. It's called Hajar Aswad.
Yeah.
And it's outside. I actually touched it myself. So you can actually touch it. It's there. And this black stone is actually believed to be came down from the heavens to Ishmael.
So it's outside the curtain.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, Nur Said is correct.
So it's outside the curtain. So how big of the stone actually?
Sorry, what was the question?
There's a circumambulation. People run and walk around the center, and so while they're walking around, I presume that's when they would touch it.
Okay.
And you can see each person here. You can sort of see them from their back. So every white line that looks sort of like a domino, that's actually a person.
Would you please explain the black stone again?
Sure. The black stone is an asteroid. From the Muslim perspective, right, it is literally a rock that came from the heavens, right?
Okay.
So it has divine significance in that way.
Thank you.
And to add more details, when Abraham and his son Ishmael actually constructed the outward boundary of the Kaaba, they used black stone in one of the corners, and that's exactly where it's put right now, because of this fragility of the stone. Now it is encapsulated into a frame to protect it from people and everything else.
Of course.
Yeah. So, but it's there intact into the wall of the Kaaba itself.
Richard?
And another question. You were starting to tell the story of there were approximately 360
idols.
But how were the Jews represented if they no longer believed in, since they did not believe in idols?
Sure. Jews were typically represented with figurines of either Moses or Abraham. Even if they weren't divine figures, it was a representation of something that was holy.
Oh, okay.
The iconoclasm that we see within rabbinic Judaism was not something that was particularly common in Arabia, right? You have to realize that a lot of the sects that existed of Judaism and Christianity in Arabia were less traditional than you saw outside of Arabia, right? Like, for example, when we're talking about Duna West being Jewish and committing these large-scale massacres against Christians, like that's not Jewish type behavior. Like Rabbi Akiva, right, who was there with Bar Kokhba was not advising Bar Kokhba to go around killing polytheists. That was just not the mentality. So there's a different way of operation here. Now, one of the interesting
So
things,
it's evolution of religion.
well, yeah, no, religions change. And the other thing is that you have to realize is that Arabia was effectively a graveyard of failed religions, right? Because if your religion was politically successful in the Byzantine Empire or the Sasanian Empire, you had power and you had no reason to leave. If yours was considered a heresy, well, then you wanted to get out because then you would be repressed for your religion. So all the religions that failed to succeed politically in the larger empires, they ended up in Arabia. I think there was another
Makes
question.
sense.
Yeah. Is there something about pilgrims wearing white to the Hajj? And if so, why are others in black and green and blue?
Yes, you're supposed to wear white when you make Hajj. I don't know about the green and the blue. Nurul or Rahma, do you want to answer?
Some people may not be coming for Hajj, the pilgrimage, so those are exempted from it. So they can wear whatever they like. Mostly the women wear the black. So they on the top right hand side, you might see a section of black on the top right hand side in the picture, right? That's basically
Yeah.
a section where women stand. Yeah, most of the white that you see is women are exempted from wearing the white. Yeah, I mean, it's recommended, but I mean, it's not mandatory to wear white. And the men only wear the two cloths of white. It's actually a representation that when you pass away, you are wrapped into two cloths of white and then you're put into the grave. That's actually the reason that they wear it.
And the green?
The green are the workers over there. So that's a uniform. They
Wow.
clean the Kaaba, the floor and everything else. They are also worshiping there.
And they get front row seating.
Well, yeah, it's a privilege. Also, I mean, there are a lot of work actually. They do a lot of work cleaning the whole entire mosque. You know, it's a huge. It can fit in 1 million people actually.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. All right. So, because Mecca had this sort of, you can call it religious shrine, it effectively became a place of peace in the sense of it was sacralized by this shrine. Now, what that meant in terms of the functionality of the area is that, as we remember, right, this area of Arabia is not unified under any nation state. It's a number of different feuding tribes controlling different areas. And so one of the unique things about this being a shrine is that it created a peaceful area where people could conduct themselves and do business. So Mecca, because of this, becomes the center of the business pipeline throughout the western side of Arabia in the transport of spice, primarily to the Middle East more broadly, like Syria or Egypt or Mesopotamia. So you have different tribes coming to Mecca specifically because they know that those conditions will be hospitable for business. And so the Quraysh tribe, which is the tribe that is ruling Mecca, wants to maintain this pluralistic religious diversity because that is the lifeblood economically of the region.
So how do they decide to become peaceful? How do they decide to be, don't fighting each other?
All of the Arab tribes basically come to the consensus that this place is holy for me, right? In whatever religion I practice, there are idols in the Kaaba that represent it, and I can go pray there, right? So this is holy for me in my religion.
So it's holy for a lot of people.
Exactly, and since it's holy for basically everybody, because everybody's religion is represented in the various idols inside the Kaaba, then it becomes an area that everybody does not want to declare war in. Because it's become holy ground to everybody. So the city effectively became a no-fighting zone, which was very convenient for the Quraysh who controlled it from an economic and political perspective.
Richard, when this shrine of Kaaba was established?
The black stone has been there for, I think, nearly 3,000 years. It may even be longer. I don't know when the actual building was built.
So, like I said, it was built. The Blackstone, you're right. Your Blackstone was there already ever since anybody came there. But the actual structure of the Kaaba was built by Abraham and his son Ishmael, peace be upon them. Only the outward boundary. Later on, the roof was established as the civilizations grew. So,
yeah.
thousands of years ago, basically.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so most of Muhammad's early life, in terms of how it's relevant to us politically, really concerns Khadija. So Muhammad, for the first 40 years of his life, was not experiencing prophecy, right? He married Khadija. He was 25 at the time. She was several years older than him, but they from all accounts, from Muhammad's side and from Khadija's side, it was a loving and supportive relationship. She was a businesswoman, and her business required. I actually don't know which is older, the Blackstone or the Open Delphi, to respond to the question in the comments. But it was a very loving relationship, and he worked in her business. She was a business owner, and her main duty was to send spices north to Palestine, and so she was involved in that process. Now, she also was there in 610 when he had his call to prophethood, and Khadija was also Muhammad's first wife. While she was alive, he did not marry anyone else. He had numerous other wives after her, but she was also the only one who bore him a child who survived to adulthood and gave further offspring, which is why Muhammad's line, genetically speaking, only follows through Khadija's daughter Fatima. All right. So in 610, Muhammad is on Mount Hira, and he meets with the angel Gabriel, who commands him to speak. Commands him to recite. And this recitation becomes the Quran, right? As we discussed in the first lecture, the Quran is not Muhammad's reaction to a divine inspiration, but it is literally the word of God imprinted onto Muhammad, and that he expresses simply as a biological function. It's not his interpretation or his understanding of divinity.
So this is Richard. Is this Gabriel on the right?
Yeah, that's Gabriel. Mm-hmm.
It might seem. Why does he look like he's from Kazakhstan or Central Asia somewhere?
This is a painting that is from. I don't remember where in Iran it's from. I want to say it's from northwestern Iran, close to the Azerbaijani border. But yes, this is an Iranian painting. As is the case with the majority of the depictions of Muhammad that I show here, they're from Iran because Iran has a lot less iconoclasm as concerns Muhammad's appearance.
It reminds me of how Jesus gets painted as a European as opposed to a Middle Eastern Jew.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the term there is Chuck Norris Jesus.
See, this is the reason why Muslims don't draw Prophet Muhammad's pictures. This is one of the reasons that, we don't want to associate him with any kind of a race or something like that. And also the people start revering and worshiping him if he have a face. So, and also Islam prohibits from making pictures, like a drawing or a painting of living beings.
Just to be clear, that's a Sunni Islamic view, and it's accepted in some schools of Jaffa and some schools of Jafari, but yeah, it's a Sunni view. Shiite Islam has generally not been iconoclastic in that way. There are some exceptions.
So who is the person on the left-hand side, the Waraqah ibn?
Yeah, Waraqah ibn Nawfal. So when Khadija sees Muhammad, and Muhammad's acts of prophecy are very physical ones. He looks like he's suffering from an epileptic shock, right? He's seizing, he's convulsing. This revelation is not a pleasurable experience for him. And He doesn't know what it is. He talks to Khadija, and she seeks out the advice of Warqa ibn Nawfal, who is an Ebionite priest. Ebionism is a Christian heresy. So he and Warqa comes to the conclusion that Muhammad is receiving prophecy, and this begins Muhammad's prophetic career.
Out of curiosity, has there ever been any medical diagnosis of these, or just so little evidence that it's not worth it?
I mean, the thing is that the only stories we know are the ones from Islamic context, right? So there are people who are like, well, this matches the symptoms of epilepsy, that's late onset or whatever. But I think whatever it was doesn't really matter in terms from a scientific perspective. This is an experience that he had, and this is how he understood that experience.
Okay.
So from 610 to 622, so there's a 12-year period here, which is called the Meccan period. This is when Muhammad was generally preaching, and he preached throughout Mecca of the understanding of his revelations. And the understanding of his revelations is that there were Hanif, or those who were monotheistic, and those monotheistic peoples, be they Arabian monotheists, Jews, Christians, they had come upon the truth that there was only one God, and that he was God's chosen messenger. So he went all across Mecca to find followers, and he had a small community that was closely attached to him, probably somewhere around the 150 followers. And he began to agitate for the destruction of the idols in the Kaaba, right? Because there's only one God. This God cannot be depicted or represented. Remember, we talked about shirk when we talked about Islamic religion, right? He's mentioning that only a God that is not representational is acceptable, and so these idols are blasphemies and need to be destroyed. Quraysh, because the idols are effectively the lifeblood of the city, right? The entire reason that Mecca is commercially prosperous is because of the multi-religiosity of the Kaaba. They begin to agitate against Muhammad and his followers. This harassment intensified up to the point where Muhammad and a number of his followers believed that the Quraysh were going to kill him. So one night he escaped in 622 with his followers from Mecca to a small oasis called Yathrib in order to avoid the violence. So this sort of fundamentally changes Muhammad's career when he gets to Yathrib. So any questions about his earlier period?
Well, I just want to add that Islam is a revealed religion, just like Judaism and Christianity is a revealed religion. The revelation came down to Moses. Similar to that, revelation came down to Prophet Muhammad. Sorry, peace be upon him. So I just don't want to people think that it's a case of epilepsy or something, because if you question that, I mean, you should question all the other prophets who received revelation also. But
right.
That's one thing I want to mention here, because I heard that just now.
Exactly. For me, it's just whatever Muhammad was experiencing, he was experiencing it. Whether there's a scientific answer doesn't really clarify whether or not he was having a meaningful spiritual experience or not. There was a TV show a while back called like Eli or something about Eli, about this guy with a brain tumor, and he believes he has the gift of prophecy. And it turns out by the end of the series that he actually foresaw like an earthquake happening, right? He knew it was going to happen. And the scientists don't have any explanation for why that tumor gave him that vision, but there was clearly some experience that he was having that was beyond the realm of the scientific. And of course, I don't mean to equate Muhammad to a TV show character. What I mean to say is that the scientific explanation, even if it were true, would be unsatisfactory to explain the relationship that Muhammad was, the mental state that Muhammad was in. All right.
Fair enough.
So Mecca, so Muhammad has now escaped. He's done what's called hijrah, right? The fleeing from Mecca to Yathrib. Now Yathrib is a small oasis, and in this small oasis there are 5 major tribes. There are 3 major Jewish tribes and 2 major pagan tribes, polytheistic tribes. The Jewish tribes are the Banu Nadir, the Banu Qainuqa, and the Banu Qurayza, and the 2 major polytheistic tribes are the Aus and the Khazraj. Now, given that Muhammad was seen as an arbitrator and a man of God, they decided, Aus and Khazraj, which had a number of feuds between them, decided to appoint him as an arbitrator. And he solves the conflict between Aus and Khazraj. And because of that, he was entitled to write what was called the Constitution of Medina. Medina meaning city, and so this city took on the name Medina Munawwara or Medina Nabi, the illuminated city, Medina Munawwara or Medina Nabi, the city of the Prophet.
Medina means city.
Medina means city.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's kind of weird, right, to call the city. But yes, so the city is typically called Medina Munawwara, the illuminated city, or Medina Nabi, the city of the Prophet. So in this, he creates the Constitution of Medina.
Excuse me, does Ummah mean one?
Ummah means nation.
Okay,
Yeah, I think you're thinking of Hebrew. In Hebrew, it would be
okay, thanks.
Yeah. So Ummah, so the Muslim Ummah or the Muslim nation was the 7th constituent entity of this new constitution, right? You have the 3 polytheistic groups, right? Aus, Khazraj, and all the other polytheists together. You have the 3 Jewish contingents, Banu Nadir, Banu Qainuqa, and Banu Qurayza. And you have the Muslim Ummah. And all 7 of these groups are responsible for maintaining their selves and their customs, and they have to come together for mutual defense. In this point, Muhammad becomes the head of this new constitution. He becomes the leader of Yathrib, and he builds the Masjid al-Nabawi, the prophetic mosque. You can see the modern version in the lower left. Now, that of course is significantly more expanded than the city of Medina Munawwara was at that time. And the city originally was probably about the size of the mosque that the mosque is now. So the mosque was a small building to accommodate the Muslim community. And yeah, Muhammad effectively became the administrator of this city. So one of the things
So
that
how did he deal with the one God and these groups that have other gods? I mean, how do they resolve that?
Certainly he had conversations with them about trying to convert them, but under the provisions of the constitution, they were permitted to carry on being polytheistic. That he would later address the issue of their polytheism as more and more of them converted to Islam. So what eventually started was what are called the ghazawat, or the battles, or the raids, depending on your translation. Once Muhammad and the majority of his Muslim followers had left Mecca for Yathrib and created their own small community there, in Mecca, the Quraysh began to repossess their property. Muhammad then made the argument that if they were if the Meccans were repossessing Muslim property, then the Muslims had the right to take Meccan property. And so Muhammad began attacks against Meccan caravan raids. This got the attention over the 2 years of the rulers of Mecca, and so they wanted to send a military attaché to the Muslim camp in order to force them to stop raiding the Meccan caravans. And this led to, in 624, the Battle of Badr. So according to the Muslims, there were 313 Muslims who fought on the Muslim side, and about 3 times that on the Meccan side. But the strength and will of the Muslims to fight led to them scaring the Meccans into submission, and they won the battle. You can see in the center the memory of the 14 martyrs. Those are the 14 Muslims who did not survive the Battle of Badr. The Meccans were led by Abu Sufyan, and the Muslims, of course, were led by Muhammad. But it wasn't just Muslims who fought in this battle. You had mu'minin, right, believers who are Muslims, and the Ansar, who are the supporters. These are people from other contingents within that constitution, most of them from the polytheistic side, who fought alongside the Muslims, and the martyrs are recognized regardless of whether they were Muslim casualties or Ansar supporter casualties. All right, any questions or any comments?
You see in the miniature Ali with his two-sided two-sided, what do they call it, in his hand. That's very famous, not spear, but sword. Yeah, Ali with his two-sided sword. It's very famous in Islamic stories that he had a two-sided sword.
Absolutely. No, most of the early, most of the apostles, right, because Muhammad has his apostles, most of the apostles were very famous for their conduct in war, Ali especially. He was considered a great fighter because his heart was so pure.
Yeah, and the name of the sword is Zulfiqar, by the way. I just want to mention that the picture that you see is, that represents Abu Sufyan is actually from some kind of movie, probably from the Iran, probably.
Yeah. No, of course, there weren't photographers running around Saudi Arabia, 1400 years ago. So these clips are from movies or reenactments or similar. Okay, so after suffering that defeat, the Meccans came around again, and they engaged at what was known as the Battle of Uhud. Now, the idea was what you can see in the map in the upper right-hand side, where the Meccans are in red and the Muslims and the Ansar are in green. Muhammad put archers on this mountain that was sort of a raised outcropping in the hill, and they were protected from the back by the mountain. The idea was that the archers on the hill would stay there and shoot down any cavalry advance in order to keep, so that the Muslim infantry could continue to attack the Meccans, who had lower morale. And at first, this strategy was working. The infantry were pushing the Meccans back, the Meccans were retreating, and they started to collect booty and other war aims. The archers thought the battle was over and deserted the hilltop. This gave Khalid ibn Walid, who's the general you can see on the left-hand side, he's a general from the Meccan side, the ability to run his horses past the archers, circle back around, and then encase the infantry from both sides, leading to a Muslim defeat. However, the defeat was not a total loss from the Muslim side. Even with Khalid's stunning tactic, he was not able to completely destroy the Muslims. They were able to retreat and fight another day. So this led inexorably to a defensive war, where Muhammad decided to dig a trench. So you can see the trench that surrounds the city of Medina Munawwara. It says that there are lava flows there. It's more that there are mountains that were created by lava flows. It's not like there's hot lava everywhere. And so they built this trench, and that forced the Meccan forces to sort of camp outside the trench and start siege warfare, which they were not in any fit state to do. and this was this was mostly to Medina's advantage. They were able to basically stop the Meccans from being able to take the city, and the prolonged time around the trench meant that their resources were exhausted and they had to depart. Now, one of the things that I should have mentioned as we were going through these battles is that there was always a question of the loyalty of the Jewish tribes to the constitution of Medina during this period. So the first group to be expelled were the Banu Qaynuqa. They were expelled after the Battle of Badr. The Banu Nadir were expelled from Medina shortly after that. And so these two Jewish tribes out of the three were outside of the city. And during the Battle of the Trench, they were in coordination with the Meccans to try and outflank the defenses of Medina Munawwara, and to a certain extent they were working with the last remaining Jewish tribe, the Banu Qurayza, that were in Medina Munawwara. Muhammad was able to plant a spy in their ranks and frustrate their aims, which led to Banu Qurayza not joining in to the conspiracy with the Banu Nadir and the Banu Qaynuqa, but Muhammad still had issues with them after this battle.
I have a question about the trench battle, because I have read that the idea came from Salman Farsi, who was a Mazdaki opposition figure escaping from Iran and came to Arabia, and then he turned into a Muslim, and he was helping Muhammad. So the idea of the trench, apparently, because the Arabs didn't use the trench warfare, so apparently it came from Iran through Salman Farsi.
Yes, that's correct. Salman the Farsi was Salman the Persian was the one who gave Muhammad the idea of digging the trench. One of the things that we see both in Muhammad's lifetime and in the lifetime of the Rashidun Caliphs is their willingness to trust military matters to other individuals in their entourage and not assume that they know the best answer. So this is actually one of those cases. Now, this is something that is deeply contested by Muslims. They point out that the sources for this exist only from Ibn Ashaq. They don't exist in any of the hadith. So take this for what you will. But after the conspiracy was foiled, Muhammad gave one of the leaders of Aus, one of the formerly pagan tribe, Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh, the ability to adjudicate what should happen to the Banu Qurayza for even considering entering into the conspiracy with the Banu Nadir and the Banu Qaynuqa, who had already been expelled. Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh said that the proper treatment would be to kill all of the Jewish males over the age of 12. So between 600 and 900 Jews were slaughtered. You can see a picture of it in the upper left-hand side. The Banu Nadir fled to the city of Khaybar, which was later besieged in 630, and they were either killed or converted in that siege.
Again, in the picture, you can see Ali with his two-sided sword killing the Jews.
Well, that I just want to mention that, whether he did that or not, that is, the picture does not confirm that. Okay, just because it's in the picture, that does not mean he did it. I just want to add one more detail to that, is that as part of the Constitution of Medina, every tribe will be judged according to their religion. So the Jewish tribe was judged according to their religion, and in the book of Deuteronomy, the punishment for treason was to be executed. So basically, Prophet Muhammad actually asked Sa'ad bin Mu'adh to actually follow what is written in the Torah. Basically, that's what the punishment was given according to their scripture. Actually, just want to add that.
Yeah, no, yeah, I really appreciate the fact that you can provide the Muslim perspective on this. I mean, I've read the lines of Deuteronomy that are commonly cited, and but it may have been I may have been reading the wrong section of Deuteronomy, but the section of Deuteronomy that I saw was referring to polytheists living in the state, living in the land of Israel that would be subject to the genocide of the Israelites, right? Because Deuteronomy chapter 11 deals with what the Israelites should do when they discover the Canaanites, which is massive genocide. All right. Now, Muhammad, after dealing with all of these scattered issues, returns to Mecca and is able to conquer it. He doesn't fight a battle in Mecca itself, of course, because he respects the holiness of the city, but he fights 1 or 2 battles outside of the city, and the Meccans surrender to him. And so now, because of this fighting that has occurred between 624 and now 630, Muhammad has managed to create a number of vassals to Yathrib, to Medina Munawwara, and now by conquering Mecca, he acquires all the vassals that the Quraysh had made in the area.
Richard, are you in the wrong slide? Oh yeah.
Yeah, no, I didn't make a slide for this. So he's unified the territory, and now he's unified most of the Arab tribes under his rule. At this point, he sends a message to all of the surrounding countries, including the great empires of the Byzantines and the Sasanians, that they should convert to Islam. And one of his ambassadors is killed very close to this area called Muta. So in order to avenge this, Muhammad sends forces to attack, and they are defeated by the Byzantines at that area. Even with Khalid ibn Walid, all the best he was able to do was, and Khalid ibn Walid is probably one of the best generals in history. The best he was able to do was a functional retreat from the Byzantine Empire at this point. So what ended up happening is that Muhammad consolidated his rule in Arabia. You can see on the left-hand side map, ignore the, so he consolidated his territory around there. The rest of Arabia was in vassalage to him. He began to then destroy pagan temples and destroy the idols in the Kaaba to proclaim unity of religion, belief in only one God. So Muhammad lives until 632 when he dies, and he is succeeded by the first Khalif. Khalif means successor in Arabic. So he's succeeded by the first successor, who is his uncle, Abu Bakr. And you can see Abu Bakr on the upper left-hand side. As soon as Abu Bakr came to power, there was a seismic shift in the Islamic world, in that a number of the Arab tribes believed they were loyal to Muhammad, and that conversion to Islam was simply a recognition of Muhammad's power, not an actual religious conversion. So they engaged in what was called Ridda, or apostasy, and they returned back to their previous faith. This meant that Abu Bakr then spent the next 2 years, he only ruled for 2 years, but he spent those next 2 years fighting several campaigns. You can see the map of his campaigns on the right-hand side, to bring those Arab tribes which deserted back into the Islamic fold and reunite the empire. So,
excuse me,
yeah.
Abu Bakr, you say it's his uncle? I think it's his father-in-law.
Sorry, yes, you're right. It's his father-in-law.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
All right. So, and now to talk about the criticism of this. So, first we need to differentiate what an Islamic scholar is and what an Islamologist is, right? An Islamic scholar is a religious term, And Islamic scholars are Muslims who have studied the texts of their faith and have a lot of knowledge about that. They can be faqih, who are jurists. They can be qadi, who are judges. They can strictly be ulama, who are scholars. But they are within the Islamic perception of reality, and they're working off of Islamic texts from a within religion understanding. Islamology is the study of Islam as an external, from a scientific external perspective, in the same way that, for example, biblical criticism is different from the view of Christian priests, right? So you have this sort of distinction. So these are three very famous Islamologists. On the left, you have Ignaz Goldziher. In the center, you have John Waynesboro, and on the right, you have Patricia Krone. And before I get into the latter two, who have a lot more to say about this earlier period, Ignaz Goldziher is probably one of the first Islamologists. He lived in the later 1800s. He was a Hungarian Jew, and he was one of the few Islamologists who actually liked the religion. In fact, a lot of Islamic criticism of Islamology comes from the fact that the majority of Islamologists don't like Islam as a religion or as a construct. But Ignaz Goldziher actually did. He went to numerous mosques. He prayed with Muslims on various occasions. And his crowning achievement was the study of the Hadith literature. And he was very interested in what are called the isnad, or the chains of transmission, because in the Hadith, it will say, this was reported by X person who told Y person, who told Z person, who told A person, who told B person, who related it here, right? So you have this chain of transmission of telephone almost, you can imagine, try and preserve this text. And there were a number of scholars in early Islam, like al-Bukhari in the Sunni tradition, who were seen as able to determine whether these were good chains of transmission or bad chains of transmission. Goldziher examined the methodology that al-Bukhari used to determine whether an isnad was of good quality, and then used linguistic and historical analysis based on comparative religion, based on other scientific disciplines of the day, to determine whether or not al-Bukhari's methodology was likely or unlikely to find the best preserved hadiths and the most accurate representations of early Islam. His conclusion was that al-Bukhari was actually wrong, and that the isnads or the chains of transmission that al-Bukhari thought were the most valid were actually interpolations, because people would create a better sounding isnad to cover up a lack of transmission than the ones that look like they were badly transmitted or through less reputable people, which were the ones that were more correctly preserved. So that should sort of give you an idea of what Islamology starts with. Now, Waynesboro and Krone were much more critical of the Muhammad story, and so they sort of operate within this revisionist school. And the revisionist school of Islamic studies basically makes 5 arguments. The first one is that that Islam was not a distinct religion, that Muhammad, to the extent that Muhammad existed, some debate whether or not there even was a historical Muhammad. But they argue that, similar to the way that Dhu Nawas was a Jew living in Yemen, that this was but was practicing some kind of heretical or differentiated form of Judaism, that this was an Arab Jewish messianic movement that went into the Middle East to liberate Palestine, Israel, for Jewish reasons, right? So that's their first sort of contention. The second one is that they assert that the base of the Islamic world was not Mecca, right? That all of this trading that we've discussed alongside the Red Sea, that really was not where the engine of power would have come from. The engine of power would have come from what was in Ghassanid territory, right? The former Nabatean territory, in what's now Jordan, or the Saudi border very close to Jordan. So they believe that it comes from there because there's a much longer organized civilizations coming from those areas. They see it as a secular, that Islam is created as a result of political power, and that you have this expansion of a secular Arab government in the post-Messianic phase that eventually becomes Muslim. In fact, they argue that Caliph Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan, who is one of the Umayyad caliphs, was the one who created the doctrine of Islam. In fact, from both Muslim sources and from non-Muslim sources, until about the time of Abd al-Malik, we don't see the word Islam or Muslim. The believers called themselves mu'minin, or believers. Mu'minin, or believers, and so they are they're the ones who are involved in creating this new religion. And finally, they argue that significant portions of the Quran are not actually written in Arabic, but are written in Syriac, showing that there is some sort of fusion, that the Quran was a created, edited, and redacted text that included a number of Christian elements, which is why there's so much Syriac language in the Quran. That's the contention of revisionist scholars
Richard?
in Islamology. Yeah.
Can you remind me, what is Syriac again?
Syriac is the indigenous language of the Christians who lived in the northern parts of Syria and Iraq. It's related to Aramaic. Actually, yeah, it's a form of Aramaic.
And it's no longer spoken, I assume.
Liturgical Syriac isn't. There are modern Aramaics that are descended from Syriac.
Okay, thanks.
So,
Yeah.
Richard, all these 5 Islamologists, they are rejecting Islamic religion as a true religion, right? That's they are talking about.
Sure. Islamologists are approaching Islam from the perspective of a scientific worldview. So they're not.
And they these 5 points. Okay, this 5
Yeah.
points. They all reject as a Muslim as a origin religion.
Correct. Correct. As we pointed out, right?
Not true, but basically they are talking about that's not true. That if I have to simplify.
Right, exactly. No, and I think Nurul can comment here. No Muslim would agree to these 5 points. Like this is not what Islam would argue is the story, and I've tried to do my best to show what the Islamic version of the story would be.
Yeah, so yeah, you're right, Richard. Thank you for that. See, Islam is a continuation of the revelations that came before. So we believe, I mean, as a Muslim, we believe that the Torah and the Gospel are the previous revelations given to the other prophets, and the last and the final revelation was given to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So that's the basic foundation, and they came with the same message of worshiping one God. Even Moses and Jesus came with the same message. And the law changed over time. Obviously, as the human beings progressed, the law kind of changed. The Torah had little laws, only 10 commandments. Then we had gospel had Jesus added more, and then finally Prophet Muhammad added extra. So also want to mention that you said the word Islam, did not appear. Well, it's there in the Quran, and the word Muslim also is in the Quran, and along with the Mu'mineen. So Muslimin, Mu'mineen, Islam also, I mean, all 3 of the words appear in the Quran itself.
Sure, but the earliest Qurans that we have are from the Umayyad period, right? So that's the like, if we talk about texts that we can date to the early 7th century, they don't have that word. That's the point that I'm making, like, right? Because this is the difference between the scholarly perspective and the Islamic perspective, right? The Islamic perspective is that the Quran that we have today is the one that was revealed between 610 and 633. And the secular perspective is the Qurans that we have are as old as we can date the oldest Qurans that we have, which is from the middle of the 7th century.
Yes, and maybe for the listeners, I want to mention that Quran is mostly transmitted from generations after generations and memory only. Mostly it was memory, and it was into a textual format. The first one was made by Abu Bakr himself, and which was also given to Umar, that same copy, one copy, and then it was given to Uthman. Uthman actually collected all the dialects, 7 different dialects into one, and then he made several copies of those. So we may not have the complete manuscripts of the Quran until the 7th century. That's true, but most of that Quranic verses were transmitted via memory of the people, the Muslims living at that
Right.
time, word by word.
All right. And now this is the interesting slide where you can sort of see where these two worlds are colliding together, right? As you can see, the Muslims are gearing up just as the Byzantines and Sasanians are wearing each other out, right? So the Islamic Empire achieves its goal of unification really in 629, 630. And by 633, 634, right, you have the Islamic world at the edge of being able to advance and control more territory, because now the Ridda wars are over, and you have exactly this point: massive internal instability in the Sasanian Empire. Remember that from 629 to 633, they had 14 different emperors, 14 different Shahanshahs. The Byzantine Empire was doing a little bit better because Heraclius remained in power, but they were deeply in debt because of all the fighting over the course of the period from 602 until 629. So this is sort of where the two sides meet, right? The Muslim Empire on the rise and the Byzantine and Sasanian empires at the point of near collapse from their own internal issues. And we're going to find out what happens when those two mix next time. Any questions before we head out?
Yeah, one thing I want to mention is that, probably it's good for everybody to know that the percentage of division among the different sects in the Muslims, and majority of them, like 87 to 90% are Sunni, while 13 to 10% are only Shia. So majority of the Muslim world, 1.6 billion or 3 billion, whichever is out there, mostly are Sunni school of thought. It would help everybody. And the other variations that you will see that you have, the Ghulam, the Qadianis and the Baha'is and all that, is under the Islamic world, they are not considered as Muslims because they actually break the foundational values of Muslim, that last and the final prophet was Prophet Muhammad. And basically Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani considered himself as a prophet, and Baha'u'llah considers himself as a prophet also. So we don't, as a Muslim, ummah, we don't consider those branches as part of Islam. Just want to add that.
No, that's absolutely correct. I added that in my first presentation. We discussed what I call post-Islamic religions, which includes Baha'i, which includes Druze, which includes Azani, which includes Yarsani. There are a number of these religions that either add prophets after Muhammad, that exist at this level of batiniya that is so deep that a lot of what they do seems to reject Quranic principles, or they have a degree of reverence for Ali, which borders on Tawheed violations. So that's exactly right. All right. Any other comments?
Good. Yeah, I just was going to ask, next week, will we review this chart again?
Next week we're going to start with that, right?
Okay.
And then because then we are going into the early wars of the Rashidun Caliphate, and it's amazing how effective the Arabs are. They were really gifted, because after this war between the Meccans and the Medinans, now everybody's under one banner. So all the great generals from the Meccan side who had been fighting the Muslims for the last 6 years are now fighting on the Muslim side, along with all the generals on the Muslim side who had effectively won the war, right? So you really have some of the greatest basket of military commanders under the same roof. It's very similar to what we saw with the Mongols. What we will see with Mongols for anybody who studies them, where you had all these really great commanders basically going everywhere all at once.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Richard?
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure how to phrase this question, and I'll do my best. But I have heard that when Christ was becoming Christ, so to speak, as an adult, there was for the lack of better way of saying it, a good environment for lots of religious ideas, that there were lots of other people claiming this or that they were a prophet or this or that. Can you say the same thing about Muhammad's time in that area?
I don't know to the extent that there were other claimants to prophecy. I'm sure there were. But there was a lot of pushback on the idea that an Arab can be a prophet when Muhammad was preaching, especially among Jewish and Christian Arabians who expected prophecy to come from either current Jews or from somewhere related to that, right? That prophecy wasn't gifted to the Arabs.
That makes sense.
In this sort of way.
Yeah.
So I just want to add my perspective here is that, it goes back to that lineage of Abraham, peace be upon him, and the two wives, right? So Sarah and Hagar. So Sarah was the recognized wife of Abraham, obviously the legal wife as such, and then Hagar is considered to be the concubine of Abraham, peace be upon him. So any lineage coming through Sarah, which is Isaac and all the other prophets, Moses and Jesus and etc., they are considered with a pure lineage, right? And then anybody coming from the Hagar's lineage, from Ishmael all the way to Prophet Muhammad, they are considered to be unpure lineage, right? So that's basically the reason why it was rejected immensely. Just want to throw that perspective out there.
I don't know. But I think, and maybe you can help me here, Nurul. I don't think that there were other people wandering around Arabia at the same time claiming to be, let's say, a messiah or a prophet or something else that would try to unify the people with their religion. I think Muhammad was pretty unique for his time in trying to advocate that, because there were other Hanifs, but the Hanifs weren't claiming to be prophets. They were just claiming to follow tradition.
Well, there were three of them, very minor. I mean, it's negligible, I would say, but there were three, and I can send you that information as well. And after several years, you have Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani and Baha'u'llah also claiming the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but that's in the 18th and 19th century, so that's a very different time period. What's the question?
Yeah, I have try to clarify about the Quran. How does the Quran coming from? What I heard or I read somewhere, I don't remember, is Muhammad, the youngest wife, the last wife, Aisha, and keep all the God's words under her bed. And after Muhammad died, and she just released all the writing. Is that true or that's wrong? I don't know. That's I heard. Yeah.
Do you wanna?
Yeah, that's not a story I'm familiar with. Okay. I know that Aisha is responsible for a number of hadiths, but in terms of the actual Quran, in terms of the Islamic story, it follows pretty much what Nurul said, which is that a large number of the people had become hafiz or memorizers.
So what I know, probably the hadith, not the Quran. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, the hadith comes from Aisha. Not all of them, though. Majority of them come from her. And there's another person called Hudayfa. May Allah be pleased with them. So Aisha and Hudayfa, these are the two main people who actually wrote hadith. And obviously the Quran was written in papers, on leaves, on bones and everything. And it was compiled after the passing away of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And the one copy was made at the time of Abu Bakr. and then it was given to Omar, the same copy, and then Ottoman actually made several copies of that one copy, and eliminating the different dialects of the Quran. So that's how it was transmitted, and mostly the Quranic text, it was memorized and transmitted to the various generations after. That's how it was given to us until today. The
Right,
Quran that is reviled in India, Pakistan, or Saudi Arabia, or USA, it's exactly the same we recite. There's no change.
Well, I want to thank Richard and Narul for, Richard, first of all, and Narul to narrating a lot of this stuff. We really learned a lot today, and I really appreciate, such a detailed, and thank you for taking your questions and answers. They were really amazing. I just want to go through the schedule pretty quickly because, we do want to, kind of save our sweet spot for next week and following week. A lot of this will be rehashed and discussed, as well as we're going to go through stuff, because I guess the fact is that what we've discussed today, we will still be discussing going further, or at least foreseeable future. So just wanted to talk about schedule. And again, we switch gears a little bit. On Thursday, we're going to talk about history of, World Cups, soccer. On Saturday, we actually have an outing, and I'm thinking we should do lunch at, and meet at Metropolitan Museum for Greek Roman exhibit. And maybe we'll check out the Elise O'Neill. I'll find out how much it is. I'll distribute, the schedule to everybody. Then, next week, we meet with Richard on Russia during Caliphate on Tuesday. So do join. And again, this would be incredible. And on Wednesday, we're going to talk about Plutarch, switch gears a little bit. And it's part of our ancient reading. We're going to talk about Timoleon. So if you want to read, if not, we'll go pretty detailed into it. And on Saturday, we're going to, Marika is going to present on religion in Republic of Rome. That's, next week, Saturday. And then we have another one on the following, on next day, on Sunday, would be music in medieval times, if anybody is interested. So all the schedule is on our, website called omnicarta.org. And I'll post it here. And also we have a YouTube channel. Please subscribe if you can, to kind of help us grow the audience. And mostly we want to, stuff like this, we want to show to others to listen. Instead of people, watching Jake Paul, I would rather them watching stuff like this and learn about, Muslim religion, learn about different things that we're teaching, or we're, presenting. So everybody, thank you. And Richard, thank you. Narul, thank you. And
Richard, thanks. It was terrific as always.
Thanks very much, Richard.
Yep.
Thank you so much, and I really appreciate Narul giving the Islamic perspective. It helps color everything.
Thanks to Narul.
Thanks, Richard. Excellent presentation.
guys, appreciate it.
All right, thank you.
All right, bye. See you next week.
So how many more
Thanks.
weeks?
Bye-bye.
Forever.
Hey,
Forever. Good. Okay. So, all right. See you.
Okay.
Take care.
Take care, guys.